The night my entire life changed began with a stranger smiling at me across a crowded ballroom, holding a glass of sparkling water as if he had been waiting years for that exact moment. He congratulated me on the incredible future my grandmother had secured for me. But when I looked at him with complete confusion and admitted I had no idea what he was talking about, the warmth disappeared from his face and was replaced by a silence that made my heart race before he quietly whispered that we needed to talk as soon as possible. My name is Hannah Brooks, and for almost 30 years I believed I was simply the unlucky child in a family where everyone else seemed to succeed with ease while I struggled through every stage of life. I lived in a modest apartment in Portland, worked long hours as a graphic designer for a small marketing company, and spent nearly every evening taking freelance projects because my paycheck barely covered rent, groceries, transportation, and the endless stack of bills that always seemed to arrive before I could recover from the previous month. The only person who truly understood how exhausting my life had become was my best friend Mia, who worked as a veterinary assistant and somehow managed to stay cheerful even after spending entire days caring for injured animals. She constantly reminded me that difficult seasons never lasted forever, although she quietly admitted she could never understand why my own parents acted like helping me with even the smallest problem would somehow destroy their lives, especially when they seemed perfectly willing to spend money on almost everything else. My parents, Victoria and Richard Brooks, lived less than an hour away in one of the nicest neighborhoods outside the city, where every home looked like it belonged in a luxury magazine and every holiday decoration seemed carefully planned months in advance. My younger brother, Ethan, had grown up surrounded by opportunities that I could only dream about because my parents proudly paid for his private education, expensive vacations, and even the down payment on his first house, while I was constantly reminded that learning to struggle would supposedly build stronger character and prepare me for adulthood. As I drove home from work every evening, I often wondered why life felt so different for me than it did for everyone else in my family, yet I always convinced myself there had to be a reasonable explanation that I simply could not see. Looking back now, I realize the answers had been hidden in plain sight for years, waiting for one unexpected conversation with a stranger to expose a secret so devastating that it would completely destroy the version of my family I had spent my entire life trying so desperately to believe. When I was a little girl, the one person who always made me feel important was my grandmother, Eleanor Brooks, whose gentle smile could calm every fear that seemed far too heavy for a child to carry alone. She never treated me like the forgotten member of the family, and every time we sat together on the porch of her old countryside home, she would tell me that one day I would understand how deeply she believed in me, even if other people failed to show it. After Grandma Eleanor passed away, everything inside our family quietly changed, although I was too young to recognize it at the time because grief has a way of hiding the truth behind sadness and routine. My parents rarely mentioned her anymore. The family visits became less frequent, and every question I asked about her belongings or the promises she had once made was answered with the same polite explanation that there was nothing left to discuss because everything had already been settled. As the years passed, I accepted hardship as something completely normal because it seemed to follow me wherever I went. Beginning with college, when I worked part-time jobs just to afford tuition and use textbooks that were already falling apart, I still remembered calling my mother one evening after my aging car broke down on a deserted highway, hoping she might help me pay for emergency repairs. But instead she calmly told me that adulthood meant solving my own problems and that depending on family would only make me weaker in the future. Meanwhile, Ethan's life continued moving in the opposite direction, and although I never blamed him because he had no reason to question the generosity surrounding him, the difference between our lives became impossible to ignore. My parents celebrated every one of his accomplishments with expensive gifts, helped him move into beautiful apartments without worrying about rent, and proudly told relatives how important it was to invest in his future while quietly pretending they simply could not afford to do the same for me. Standing inside the brightly lit ballroom after hearing the stranger mention my grandmother's supposed gift, every painful memory suddenly returned with new meaning that I could no longer ignore no matter how hard I tried. Before leaving the event, the elderly gentleman introduced himself as Martin Hale, my grandmother's longtime financial advisor, and after studying my shocked expression for a long moment, He asked me to meet him at his office the very next morning, because he believed a terrible mistake had remained hidden for far too many years. I barely slept that night because every question spinning through my mind seemed more unbelievable than the last. And by sunrise I had convinced myself there had to be some simple misunderstanding that would be cleared up within a few minutes. Mia insisted on coming with me, saying she had never seen me so shaken before, and she refused to let me walk into an unfamiliar office alone while carrying the weight of so many unanswered questions. Martin Hill welcomed us into a quiet conference room overlooking downtown Portland, where shelves filled with neatly labeled financial records surrounded a polished wooden table that somehow made the entire meeting feel even more serious. After offering us coffee that neither of us touched, he opened a thick leather folder and gently explained that my grandmother had created a private investment trust and educational fund worth several $1,000,000, specifically designed to become mine when I turned 21 so I would always have the freedom to build the life I wanted. For several long seconds I simply stared at him because nothing he said matched the reality I had lived through during the past decade, where every achievement had required endless overtime, sacrifice, and sleepless nights just to stay financially afloat. When I finally found my voice, I quietly admitted that I had never received a single letter, phone call, bank statement, or legal document about any trust, and Martin's expression immediately changed from confidence to deep concern as he slowly reached for another folder resting beside him. He carefully spread dozens of financial statements across the table, revealing years of bank transfers, withdrawal requests, investment reports, and official authorization forms that carried my parents' signatures on nearly every important page. As he walked us through the records one by one, the horrifying truth unfolded before my eyes because the money meant for my education, my future home, and my financial security had quietly disappeared over the years, paying for luxury vacations, expensive renovations, high-end vehicles, and countless personal expenses that had absolutely nothing to do with me. My hands trembled so badly that I could barely hold the final document Martin handed across the table, and every painful memory from my past suddenly fit together, like pieces of a puzzle I never realized existed until that very moment. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by sadness alone, I felt something far stronger beginning to replace it, because for the first time in my life I understood that my struggles had not been caused by bad luck but by a betrayal so carefully hidden that it had stolen years I could never get back. Martin quietly explained that his recent audit had uncovered inconsistencies impossible to ignore, and after comparing decades of financial records with the original legal documents prepared by my grandmother, he realized the trust had been treated like a personal family account instead of a protected inheritance belonging only to me. He apologized for not discovering the misuse sooner because everyone involved had relied on official paperwork submitted by my parents. But he assured me that the evidence now sitting on the conference table was more than enough to begin recovering what had been taken. Over the following weeks, a legal team gathered every bank statement, property record, and financial transaction connected to the trust, and with each new report the pattern of deception became even more painful to read. Every expensive vacation my parents had enjoyed, every luxury renovation to their home, every investment made in my brother's future, and every major purchase they proudly celebrated had been funded with money my grandmother had intended to protect my dreams instead of theirs. Eventually, Martin arranged a formal meeting inside a private mediation office where every conversation would be recorded and every document officially presented, making it impossible for anyone to deny the truth once the evidence was revealed. My parents arrived looking calm and confident, believing they were attending a routine financial discussion, while Ethan followed behind them wearing a confused expression because he had no idea why the entire family had suddenly been asked to gather together. The atmosphere changed the moment Martin placed several thick binders onto the conference table and carefully explained that every withdrawal, transfer, and payment had been traced directly back to my grandmother's trust fund through signed financial authorizations. My mother's face slowly lost its color while my father remained completely silent, and Ethan looked back and forth between the documents and our parents as though he were watching the foundation of everything he believed about our family collapse right in front of him. When my mother finally tried to explain that they had always planned to replace the money once their finances improved, her words sounded empty even to her own ears because years of evidence proved otherwise, and my father eventually admitted they had convinced themselves they were only borrowing from the trust for a short time. I looked directly at both of them and calmly told them that the greatest thing they had stolen was not my inheritance but the confidence, security, and opportunities I should have received years earlier. And for the first time since the truth came to light, neither of them had anything left to say. The legal process continued for several months, and although it demanded endless meetings, paperwork, and difficult conversations, every new ruling brought me one step closer to reclaiming the future my grandmother had wanted me to have all along. The court ordered that the remaining assets be transferred into accounts under my complete control, while additional proceedings required my parents to answer for years of financial misconduct that could no longer be hidden behind excuses or carefully rehearsed explanations. During that time, Ethan reached out to me on his own because he could no longer ignore the truth after seeing the overwhelming evidence presented during the mediation meeting, and he admitted that he had spent his entire life believing our parents had earned everything through honest success. We talked for hours about our childhood, our grandmother, and the countless moments that suddenly made sense, and although neither of us could erase the past, we agreed that honesty was the only way either of us could build a better future. Once everything was finally settled, I purchased a comfortable home that fit my needs rather than my pride, expanded my graphic design business into a successful creative studio, and established a scholarship in my grandmother Eleanor's name to help hardworking students who lacked financial support. Every scholarship recipient reminded me that true wealth is measured by the opportunities we create for others instead of the possessions we collect for ourselves. And that realization became the greatest gift my grandmother ever left behind. I eventually accepted that forgiveness does not always mean restoring broken relationships, because some wounds heal only after healthy boundaries are built with patience, honesty, and self-respect. My parents remained distant, and although I no longer carried bitterness toward them, I chose to protect my peace by surrounding myself with people like Mia and Ethan who proved through their actions that love is built on trust instead of convenience. Looking back, I no longer see myself as the forgotten daughter who spent years wondering why life seemed unfair, because discovering the truth gave me something far more valuable than money by teaching me my own worth and giving me the courage to build a future free from deception. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.